I obviously got the bit of a graveyard shift, so after lunch, postprandial narcolepsy will be setting in. So I'm not going to go too data heavy. This is more of a kind of a philosophical insight into, my thoughts, my approaches to managing, the team here at the UFC. I think on a day-to-day basis, everyone in the room probably consumes themselves with performance and optimizing performance. And I think, this presentation is about the narrative of underperformance versus performance and how we see it. And it's obviously semantics to some extent, but I'm going to dive into kind of how I perceive kind of looking at, managing an integrated performance team and ultimately how we can optimize our services. Performance, and I don't need to tell anybody in the room, but, performance is about achievement. It's about effectiveness. And the pursuit of performance is what we, like I say, consume our time and effort with. And doing that in a sports environment within the construct of pretty chaotic and non-coherent, environments is challenging and draws upon many, many different systems, be it physiological, psychological, biomechanical, tactical, technical, you name it, all those different things that go into that. And what we're obviously tasked with is maximizing the potential to succeed and perform optimally. And for those of you that might have, I don't know if it's a privilege, but have heard me talk before. I use this slide a lot from Ross Tucker and Malcolm Collins. It really iterates what I try to look at with the concept of optimizing performance. We're obviously given, a vessel, a genetic bucket that is as an athlete that's standing in front of it. All right. And how do we go about maximizing or optimizing that potential? That's our role in this whole conversation. Obviously here, individual A and E are not physically training, but they've got innate potential that could potentially, could lead them to high levels of human performance. And then obviously all the black bars is the integration of training and how we overlay that, where we can take someone's innate potential and we're either going to do a great job and maximize that potential, or through our interventions, our methodologies, we're actually missing the needle a little bit and we don't take the athlete to where they can potentially be optimized. So this conversation is ultimately what we should consume our time with on a day-to-day basis as we're working with athletes. If you just give me an opportunity to talk about this, I mean, there is the same amount of energy in a chocolate chip cookie as there is the same weight of a stick of dynamite. Think about that. So why doesn't this chocolate chip cookie blow your head off when you eat it? Because it's all to do with, the molecular potential is there, but it's all to do with the orchestration of what's going on within the chocolate chip cookie, right? So now we're into a conversation of resources. The resources are available, but the orchestration to make this chocolate chip cookie perform like a stick of dynamite is simply not there. Okay. And that's what I entertain myself with and my team here at the UFC Performance Institute is, yes, we've got resources. Yes, we've got expertise, but how are we actually orchestrating our system? How are we maximizing our system to optimize the potential for an athlete to succeed? Because that's what we need to consume our time with. So for me, the conversation around performance orchestration is a mathematical equation. The probability, and now we start to get into, probabilities of success, which is what we're dealing with. Nothing is guaranteed in sport. So how do we maximize probabilities of performance optimization? It comes down to a number of things. I refer you back to the previous slide from Ross Tucker, that diagram. Innate potential. Like, what is someone's innate potential? There's obviously, phenotypic variants, whether it's the ACTN3 gene for speed or whether it's the AMO-A gene for the warrior gene, which is, a big predisposition in combat athletes. There's predispositions that give people the potential. All right. So how do we orchestrate that? Well, we orchestrate it by looking at our performance interventions. For me, that's a software conversation. I don't mean fusion sports. I mean the software of our whole ecosystem, our people, our IP, our intellect, our knowledge. All right. How are we maximizing performance interventions? If you're going to be on one of my teams, there's an expectation that that's a given. You are pursuing best in class or cutting edge service provision that is current and informed through data, research, literature, and it means that we're operating a particular standard. And that's kind of an expectation. It's an unwritten rule. There should be no one on a team anywhere in this room that is just happy doing status quo, all right? Performance interventions are what we are about as performance professionals, okay? Then the second part of it is obviously the relationship between resources, but what do you do with those resources? What's the orchestration of them, and how do you maximize the potential of those resources to impact the athlete and increase the probability of performance optimization? This is not an exhaustive slide, but, you know, there's many more components to this. But when you look at, you know, human performance and human potential as a paradigm, you know, there's many, many different facets that go into it. Obviously, you've got physical sides, you've got cognitive input, you've got the integration of different inputs, and you have a performance output. All right. And you can, like I say, this is by no means, shape or form an exhaustive representation of what goes on in sports performance, but it's complex from the get-go. All right. There's so many different parts to this. Underneath it and underpinning it is this concept of system orchestration, which is my role and my responsibility as the performance director for our team to position my staff and to position our relative ologists and experts to maximize their influence and maximize the stickiness of their work with our athletes or with our coaches. So my role in terms of orchestration is removing noise, removing the distractions, removing the problems, taking the firefights away from them so that they can be, again, dedicated and focused on what they need to be do about performance interventions, coming back to the mathematical equation. But it's also about, you know, automation and system processing and configuration, philosophy, culture, all the different things that everyone that stepped on this stage in the last 2 days has spoken to, okay? But who's thinking about the orchestration? Who's making that chocolate chip cookie explode in the mouth? That's the way I look at it, all right? And that's the way I perceive my role. But then we come into this narrative of underperformance, all right? Because we're all in the pursuit of high performance. We're all in the pursuit of maximizing someone's potential. But what happens when it doesn't go the way you want it, or when you don't optimize that performance band and you don't get the innate potential to where it can be through your training interventions or your coaching strategies? And that's the type of thing that keeps me awake at night, sadly. So then we're into this kind of conversation, this narrative around underperformance. And again, I don't need to spell it out to you. I'm not trying to teach you to suck eggs, but it's the underachievement of the goals that were set. All right. It's the ineffectiveness of our service provision or the intervention and the strategies that we put in place. So underperformance, and I'm not just necessarily talking about, you know, unexplained underperformance syndrome, which is very much a physiological and psychological paradigm in itself. I'm just talking about generically about how can we ensure that our services and our influence and our impact on our athletes are as close to, damn it, going to be influential in the way we expect it and to the level that we expect to make those changes. So we come into this understanding of the web of determinants of performance. And again, think about it. Think whether you work in the military, whether you work in sport, whatever you may do, there's so many variables that go into creating the outcome. And it's almost an exhaustive list. Okay. But we're dealing with this symbiotic environment of an organism that is a human athlete and all the external, internal characteristics and variables that are going to influence the outcome. So immediately we're talking now about a risk profile. And I don't necessarily, it's not, risk profiling as a concept is about understanding all these respective components. So that's a big undertaking. All right. And again, it's the cross we bear as performance services to try and understand all those different facets that are going to try and impact the outcome of something. Then we're going to be exposed to a particular risk, whether it's entering the battlefield or whether it's stepping into onto the court or onto the field or into the pool or whatever it may be. You're going to expose more variables, more potential for a risk to disrupt and disturb these performance determinants. There's obviously this internal feedback loop that this exposure to a risk is going to either offset, stabilize, or change in some way, shape, or form the potential of this web of determinants. Now, that might be something that the exposure to the risk doesn't create too many problems, and everything is good. You either maintain performance or you can actually maximize the potential of performance. If our exposure to a training intervention, a nutrition intervention, or whatever it may be, is impactful and effective, of course, this is the cyclical rotation we want. But there's going to be at times certain insults that are going to push it the other way, and we're going to get underperformance, or the consequence of a less than desirable outcome that was below our expected or targeted levels. And I think that's an interesting way to look at it. It's kind of flipping our traditional approach to understanding, performance services and what you're trying to do in terms of optimizing performance, to mitigating or minimizing the risk of an underperformance. Some will say, well, Duncan, I mean, it's the same thing, but is it really? And is it just a different way of looking at, the same problem that might work for some people and might work for others? But that's the way kind of we've been looking at it, or I've certainly been looking at it recently, to try and look at mitigation of underperformance, because the expectation on my team is that everyone is certainly trying to maximize the performance against best-in-class standards. Hope that kind of makes sense. So let's just talk about risk momentarily. And like I say, risk is everywhere. And I'm not talking about, risk of death. Unfortunately, some people in the room potentially are associated with that in the military. We're not. So what is risk? How do we define risk? And risk is everywhere. I'm going to fall off the stage right now. The microphone might stop working. You can't hear me. In our world, risk is an athlete missing a weigh-in. An athlete is cramping after a rehydration strategy following a weigh-in. An athlete is risk of illness or an upper respiratory tract infection on a flight to New Zealand. There's risk everywhere. Okay, and how we define those things and start to really interrogate all the respective components that we define as risk to performance potential, again, it becomes quite a daunting task. So conceptualizing risk, again, is something that I entertain myself with, and it's a probability question. It's a probability of, is the performance intervention that we're putting in place probably going to be effective or not? And what's that spectrum? What's that profile look like? We can read literature, we can implement a strategy, we can philosophize ourselves and say, we're going to go off scope a little bit and we're going to introduce something and try it out. There's risks with all those types of approaches. Okay. And like I say, in the world of sport, which is chaotic and hugely non-coherent, risk is everywhere. Risk is everywhere. So trying to create a truly stable system in what is largely chaotic and very momentarily fleeting, I find fascinating. I find it a really fascinating approach. And again, in my role now, it's about how do I align, my fantastic staff to mitigate the risk of their services not being as optimized as they should be. All right. So that's kind of the way I look at it. And there's different ways to look at how you implement risk strategies. And again, I would love to speak to some of the military folk in the room, because I know you're going to have very specific ways of looking at risk. This is kind of my bastardized version of it. But ultimately, risk management is something which, again, is integral to the systems which we've built here now at the Performance Institute and how we go about our day-to-day services. So risk is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. And again, non-exhaustive list. I would need, 20 slides putting up different things, and you're still not going to get, all the things that can impact risk. These 6 kind of buckets, or these 6 octagons, are what we call our fight cycle. So an athlete would go through an off-camp general preparation phase, a specific preparation phase. They'll go into a fight camp where they've got a fight booked, a scheduled date to compete. Then you're into fight week, which has got very specific requirements around making weight, first of all. And then you move into the competition phase, and then you're into post-fight and recycling. And this is a cyclical kind of process to it. But again, all I've done here is drop a few risks, potential risks on there. Everything from amenorrhea and, POS types like syndrome characteristics through to, concurrent training stimuli. And have we got that balance right? Or is someone going on a flight? Or what's the warm-up? Is this the best way to potentiate for fighting? All these different risks are conversations that we're having all the time about how we maximize the potential. Now, some of them are organism-based and physiologically based, and some of them are systematic-based. Okay, so we can already start to differentiate where is the risk coming from. And again, my role as a performance director, the way I see it, is to step back in an umbrella role, consider all these respective risks with my respective team members, then start to remove the risks as much as we can so that their services can be sticky and can be impactful and effective. So for me, risk management, and in the room, I'm sure some of you can relate to this, whether in your current experience or previous experiences, but this is dogmatic in some parts of sports performance, okay? We talk about interdisciplinary teams, but everyone's got, excuse my French, the professional dick swinging contest going on, that my profession is way better than your profession, and we don't talk to you, we don't represent what you're doing, etc., etc. Guys, come on, that's ridiculous, okay? Because ultimately, everyone's going to look at it on a performance problem on a disciplinary-based perspective and see a very blinkered approach to a problem. They're going to interpret that problem the way they need to see it for their professional biases. They're going to have an observation. They're going to have a strategy about how do I affect this? So this athlete's not running fast enough. Okay, the medical team are going, well, it's an Achilles tendinopathy. The strength coaches are going to go, oh no, well, it's the glute kinetics, are not firing properly, and we need to get some strength into that area. The psychologists are going, oh, there's too much anxiety when they're prepping. Like, everyone's looking at the same problem in a very different way, right? It's the same freaking problem, okay? So we end up with independent siloed outputs. So for me, it's about this process of integration of problem solving. Okay, it's about taking the same problem, having very different interpretations of the problem, but figuring out a system and figuring out a way that brings it together in an interdisciplinary, fashion, and creates an interdisciplinary solution that everyone on a team understands how we're going to solve that problem. Okay, I think this is one of the most challenging things to do on a performance team, but if you get to something like this and do it well, it is hugely impactful. Okay, because now you really are starting to get to athlete-centered systems that can be effective on optimizing performance. So I come back to this paradigm of risk management. Okay, and again, I'm jumping around a little bit and fleeting around the kind of concepts, but for me, it's about identifying, evaluating, and influencing factors or variables or whatever you want to call them that can influence the output of success or performance or achievement against the goals that you've set. And again, you can dive into a bunch of resources and literature around risk management and whatever it may be, but you always come up with these kind of three concepts of assessment, management, and mitigation. Okay, and this process of how do we do that? It's very clear. Like, do you know what the risks are? Have you identified the risks? If you know what risks are and understand the magnitude of those risks, how do we then try and manage them and affect them? And ultimately, what I want to do is minimize them. We want to minimize risk as a concept, risk to performance optimization. So here at the Performance Institute, we've historically, when we were coming up on 5 years now, we opened up about 4.5 years ago. When I first, we had a team of 9 that started. We've now got a team of 26 performance professionals here at the PI in Vegas. We immediately went to kind of this conversation around the what it takes to win conversations. There was no data, no insight around the sport of mixed martial arts, right? Professional mixed martial arts is very young in terms of our insights and our awareness to it. So we straight away dived into, all right, guys, we've got to figure out how people win the fight. What are the determinants of performance, that web of determinants that is going to be influential to the outcome? Do we really understand them? Do we know them? Okay. So what happened was, within our respective technical areas, all the team diligently went away and started trying to understand what's those factors in their technical areas that really influence the outcome. Now, that was fantastic to a point, all right? But 3 years, 4 years down the road, soon figured out that whilst we started to understand some of the determinants within the technical areas, there were still holes in the whole story, all right? Because there's too much chaos, there's too much noise. This is not a linear sprint from the start line to the finish line on a 100 meters track. It's not a rowing event where we look at split times over, a 2K rowing course. Things like that. Fantastic if you work in those sports. And, I'm not derogatory to it at all. But in a sport like mixed martial arts, coming back to the chaos and the non-linearity of it, like, it's really hard to truly define what are the determinants of performance when this risk profile is gigantic. It's so chaotic that us trying to hang our hat on this is the methodology that we're chasing all the time is really challenging to the team. So again, what philosophically happened to myself a little while ago, and the team will probably chuckle because this is very like live to us right now in terms of we live in it, is I moved from a reductionist, deterministic modeling type strategy in terms of what does it take to win, what are the key components of winning, into more of a systematic inquiry process. And systematic inquiry comes into probability. So we're moving from now, what does it take to truly win in our sport, to how do we increase the probability of success? Because that's about as far as we can go in chaos. Like because of all the variables that are truly in our sport and the business model that we work to, where we've got 600 fighters from 47 different countries around the world, all coming and going at different times. Like, it's hard to stabilize the reason why someone is successful in that type of model. Okay. So here we go. Let me geek out a little bit. Now we get into nonlinear dynamics of systems, okay? Dissipating systems are in moments of high flux all the time. And you need that flux to put on constant pressure, because out of the tension of the pressure comes emergence of new systems, all right? So we truly work in a nonlinear environment. Change is constant. We're seeing emergent systems coming and going all the time. They're all dependent on each other, et cetera, et cetera. It's really hard to say, well, our guys are successful because they have, this many strikes, an overhand right this many times in a fight, or the takedown, they have top control for so many minutes during the fight. It's our statistics will tell us that, but the actual foundations and underpinning that get to that point is so much in flux, and there's so many other variables that go into that, that for our team to say, well, we know that that's what we're pursuing, was really hard for them and almost demotivating, because you're chasing something that isn't there, which is why we moved from deterministic modeling to probability conversations. And again, you might say, listen, that's, you're splitting hairs right there. But honestly, that mind shift is really reinvigorating the team to understand, okay, now I've got a little bit more freedom to try and approach my work with best practices, but it's not pursuit of the finite granular level things that I think are the cause of winning, because it's so diverse. Then we get into entropy production, principles of entropy, all right, which is, lack of order and predictability. Take one moment right now and think about your day on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week. Is it going to be super predictable? Unless you're a bank clerk or something, going in and sitting down at the same desk. We work in sport. We work in chaotic environments. Researchers may be different. I'll hold my hands up, right? But in our world, like, no 2 days are the same. No 2 training days are the same. It's chaotic. Then we move into kind of the principle of field theory, momentary valences. I do a strength session on Monday morning at 9 a.m. In a week after that, come in, do that same strength session at Monday at 9 a.m. But I've only had 4 hours sleep versus 8 hours sleep the week before. That's a momentary valence. It's the same insult, but it's going to be completely different outcome. We can't think that risk is now not changed. So these valences are happening all the time. And that's why we monitor. That's why we test and track and profile. All right. To understand momentary changes and momentarily valences that influence outcome. And then equifinality. There's more than one way to skin the cat conversation. You can get to the same outcome in many different ways, okay? So these 4 principles were kind of the foundation of me thinking, hold on, this is what it takes to win approach doesn't work for my team, doesn't work for us. It's making us inefficient, and it's locking us into processes and beliefs and systems that actually are probably unobtainable. Because it's really hard for us to lock down what are the true determinants of performance that make you win every fight in mixed martial arts. That's almost impossible to understand. So how do I continue to motivate the team? Well, we move from not a silo-based approach, but let's call it a technical discipline-based approach, where we're looking at, understanding those determining factors into clusters of success. What clusters? What are the key priorities that will increase the probability of success? And if we can all wrap our team and we can all come together on probability conversations that we can all relate to, now our team and our system is going to function again in a very different fashion. Okay. So here we've got, again, you're going to think, this is pretty remedial and rudimentary, Duncan, right? But, what are the performance priorities we're chasing? We're going to have different technical areas, as you guys will. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but whether it's physical, medical, diet, nutrition, whatever it may be, the strength and conditioning coaches, they're going to get after physiological adaptation. They're going to get after training load management. They're going to get after recovery, regeneration, those types of things. Of course, our dietitians, metabolic characteristics, body composition characteristics, weight making for competition. Oh, hold on. We've got to immediately now see that. We've got to see that and make these two different people from professional technical backgrounds and awareness of what their interpretation of performance is, which is coming from very different angles, and say, well, we can connect that together. And again, it's simple to say, but I've seen it happen or not happen so many times, or happen poorly. Same thing, if you drop this, whatever your service is, here we've got psychology, performance lifestyles, well, that's a wellness and a mental, a metabolic and a health and wellness conversation. So can we connect this up? All right, these are the types of things that myself and Aaron Kananen, who's my performance support manager, do in terms of the horizontal connectivity of our verticals. All right, we've got all these technical verticals, and what makes teams truly successful is the horizontal connectivity between them. So orchestration, it's a conversation of the chocolate chip cookie, all right? We've got resources, but who owns recovery? As a concept, who owns recovery? Well, it's the sports scientists. The sports scientists do that. And strength coaches, they're going to do the recovery. Everyone freaking owns recovery, all right? We all have a role to play, whatever your technical background, in recovery. So if everyone thinks that everyone else is owning it, who actually is driving the conversation and driving the narrative and making sure it happens? Or is the team just thinking, well, they're going to get it. They're going to take care of it. And then it slips through the cracks. So these are very kind of philosophical ways to look at a problem and an approach. But this is what we're doing with our team here at the Performance Institute, okay? It's really trying to pull together these probability clusters, which are multidimensional priorities. Our weight cut. You can say nutrition and medical. Both those people are taking a role in the weight cut conversation. Heat acclimation for the weight cut. Nutrition, sports science, sports psych. Water loading. All right. No, that might just be purely a nutrition or a dietetics conversation. Non-essential body mass. All right. The dietitians are going to get involved. Our chefs, our culinary side, our S&C side from the physical and caloric expenditure. These clusters sit everywhere. All right. So it's not necessarily about determining the finite things of what it takes to succeed in a particular technical area, but look at them as clusters of priority that we can wrap our whole team around. So this is just a crude example again. In terms, I talk about knowledge and delivery. All right. Do we have the knowledge to succeed? And does our delivery infrastructure allow us to do that? So we can have that used to be, do we know what it takes to win? Which again, in mixed martial arts, no. We've been doing this nearly 5 years. I cannot tell you hands down what makes a fighter win. I can tell you the things that probably will influence the ability to win, whether it's ground control time, or whether it's significant strike rate, or whether it's what their weight descent metrics look like. I can tell you that probably will influence. But I can't tell you what wins in our sport, all right? Because it's so chaotic. So if we look at changing this to what is probability of success at risk, now we can get into a little bit more of a conversation where we can put a scoring system together, very crude, very subjective. But again, looking at, is it in a good place, but we need to do something, or is it problematic, or is it urgent that we are missing the point on this kind of intervention? So let's take a cluster up here. Let's say workload management, right? Acute to chronic, whatever. It's just me putting in some words. But workload, that's a concept that everyone has got an interest in that as a performance professional, okay? But we can now score it in terms of what's our external network around our expertise, our intellectual property that's going to help us understand this. Do we have strong links into a global network of experts around workload? We can score that as red. No, we don't know anybody. I've never heard of Tim Gabbett, whatever, so all that type of stuff. Internally to the team, do we know, are we starting to look at workload management? Do we have core philosophies and principles? Are we measuring it? Yes or no, or scoring it? So this is like a very rudimental, crude way of doing it, but we're taking a performance priority and we're starting to interrogate it. We can do that with our return to play, for concussion or acute care. And now you're starting to really understand not our sports medicine optimizing what they're doing, not our strength and conditioning coaches doing what they're doing, our nutrition doing what they need to do. But no, in return to play, where are we at as a team? What is the probability of this being a successful intervention? Okay, so now we get back into the conversation of system orchestration, right? Whether it's individual assessments, intervention design, the actual stakeholder alignment, which is ourselves and our team, as well as others on the athlete side, and looking at, performance improvement and is it likely? So we can take something like heat acclimation. So this cluster right here is heat acclimation. We're starting to look into a lot of heat acclimation as a beneficial precursor to making weight effectively. Okay, can our athletes sweat? They're going to be going in a sauna, they're going to go in a hot bath, whatever it may be, to help them passively remove hydration so they can drop to a particular weigh-in weight. So acclimating to that heat is a conversation that we're getting into. So we've got a certain amount of questions here related to different areas, and we can immediately start to score it, okay? And we can pick out our performance priorities and we can evaluate it and interrogate it. So in this case, heat acclimation, we might have from a performance assessment perspective, we might not be measuring skin or core temperature. We might not be looking at sweat rates, all right? Can we really understand heat acclimation without these variables? In terms of an intervention design, we only did 3 heat exposures, so seem to be good to go. Well, we might know that 10 to 14 heat exposures is the minimum that you need to get to before you start to see those adaptations in the response. Okay, so is that a myth? Well, that's why it's orange. Do the wider team understand why are we doing heat acclimation? So you can start to answer these very basic and straightforward questions, but it's interrogation of the system in a different way. This is a really basic slide, but again, the other way, what I'm now trying to do is drive the interdisciplinary happenings. Like on the panel I was on yesterday, one of my questions was like, is culture conscious or subconscious? I'll tell you what I try to do. I try to make it as conscious as possible. All right. I want to measure it and try to measure it and try to understand it so that we're always interrogating our culture. Yes, I get the point that, culture is also subconscious, the way we conduct ourselves and our behaviors, but the more we can talk about it, interrogate it, and see if we're close to it, I believe philosophically that's going to be better, right? So what's this? Well, this is actually from our nutrition team. So each of our teams, including our operations team, because operations is the foundations of the performance team, all right? So even our operations team are doing this type of probability conversation. But this is 2 performance requirements from one of the clusters that is nutrition periodization. So nutrition periodization is a overarching cluster for our team. And then we've got the general prep phase and the fight camp. And then within that, you can see there's different factors. So then what happens within the factor, let's just take body composition adaptation. The dietitians are basically saying, I need the strength and conditioning coaches and the sports scientists to help me with this. They're telling me, or they're scoring it and saying, we need these people. Okay, it might be fueling strategies as indicated by the weight descent requirements. Hold on, now the MMA guys, the sports medics, strength and conditioning, sports science, and it looks like psychology, everyone's in on that one. All right, so now we can start to build up this scoring rubrics, or I can look at it and say, okay, where do I need to drive integration? So here we've got the S&C team at the top, nutrition, sports science. You can see on the left that they had 5 clusters that they identified. There's 6 down here, and there's 5 up here. And then for each of those clusters, there's a certain amount of performance requirements. So what I can do if I take the strength and conditioning one at the top here, you can see that their highest level of integration on a multidisciplinary or an interdisciplinary team status is a score of 27, which is relating to mental fortitude in training. All right, that's something that's they're requiring the highest degree of integration within the team for promoting mental fortitude for our athletes in training. We can also go to that next box down, and you see the red 14 that's highlighted on the color coding, that now psychology, as you would expect, is the biggest integration. But they also need some sports medicine and some MMA support on that. So what this is allowing me to do as a performance director, and again, it's a very crude approach, but it's essentially objectifying the integration of interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary teams. It's making it happen where we can now go pursue this. All right. So it's taking this risk management to a positive summation game, right? It's talking about clusters and priorities that we can all wrap our whole interdisciplinary team around and start to fill in these boxes in its entirety by talking about probabilities and influences rather than like, what does it take to win in this hugely chaotic and non-coherent sport? It's almost impossible to answer that question. So I come back to kind of the risk assessment conversation. And again, here, I've highlighted some up here in terms of, okay, remember the slide, risk assessment, risk management, risk mitigation. It's kind of the three components. Here's risk assessment. I come back to the ubiquitous list of risks. Again, remember, it's not an exhaustive list, right? There's more, but this is just for the point of discussion for the presentation. We might highlight a number of things and say, okay, how do we assess this type of risk? All these different types of components physiologically. All right, well, we've built a metabolic risk assessment. Okay, so we now start to go through the process of doing some kind of evaluation that our nutrition team, primarily led by Clint Wattenberg on this side of things, have built out this metabolic risk assessment form, looking at all the physiological perspectives that go into metabolic health. And then we can start to, again, put objectives and scoring around what is the metabolic health of this athlete. Very straightforward process, but then we can start to understand, are they compromised in any way, shape, or form, or not? We can then pull it back to our metabolic risk assessment scoring, and we can go into the physiology. All right, we can now start to tag things together, be it stress tolerance, be it our mineral corticoids, glucocorticoid response, be it in systemic inflammation. And again, this is largely coming from the nature of cyclical restriction for weight cutting, be it caloric, be it hydration, etc., really disrupts metabolism in our sport. But how are we tying this together in terms of, are we assessing that? Do we understand it? How are we going to affect it if we don't know what it is and where it's coming from? Okay, so we build out these types of assessment forms. And again, this is just an evaluation. Once we've got the risk assessment, now we can wrap, is it a change in training load strategy? Is it a change in sleep or, mental status? Is it a supplementation strategy that is this big thing at the back here, which our Jedi of supplementation, Charles Stull, basically takes care of? But how are we going to influence that? And now we can wrap the whole team around the process of assessing and evaluating metabolic risk with an outcome and an intervention. Again, here's your scoring process. You can go, now we go through this over time. We can look at, which physiological parameters are perceived as risk coming from our ubiquitous risk list. And we can monitor those and track those across time. Now we've got clarity and visibility on what does our team need to do? Who's doing it? When are they doing it? And how impactful are they being? Okay. If it's risk management, and again, these are the 4 T's of risk management. This isn't mine by any way, shape, or form. But whether it's treat, tolerate, terminate, or transfer the risk, what do we do? How do we manage risk? If we've acknowledged it, identified it, and assessed it, what do we do with it? Like, how do we start to manage that risk? And you can see, I've just put, whether it's, you can treat a risk by looking at a performance intervention. Okay, well, we've identified something as a risk. Let's put an intervention against it. Let's add a supplementation strategy. If we tolerate it, okay, well, we know the risk is there. We know that workload is something that could present spikes in training impulse. Does that happen all the time? No, it doesn't. Sometimes it does. So let's just sit back and let's just monitor it. Let's tolerate it and watch it. Yeah. Do we terminate something? Okay, this training intervention, the way we're doing this exercise is hurting this guy's lumbar spine. Don't do the exercise. Terminate the exercise. Remove it. Do we transfer it? Is there a way to establish a new performance standard? So again, transfer. What's one of the best ways to transfer someone, potentially pulling a hamstring? Make the hamstring stronger. Your training intervention, okay? Make the tendon interaction stronger. Very basic ways of looking at the way to tolerate and transfer a risk management, So again, come back to the ubiquitous list of risks. Now you're into different things. So if we're managing risk, we've got some systemic ones, we've got some physiological ones, etc., etc. Okay, let's just dashboard it and monitor it. Whatever, maybe this is aura data. So here, fight camp data. We can look at our sleep aggregation, etc., etc. We're just sitting back and watching. We are tolerating the risk. All right, and this is the conversation of risk management, or the concept of risk management to myself in terms of system orchestration. All right, so we're tolerating the risk. We're just watching it. Same thing. 2 different fight camps. This is readiness metrics on the bottom and activity metrics on the top. So we can start to compare and contrast the previous fight camp versus the new fight camp across an 8-week period. We're starting to look, just watch the responses. Okay, you're just tolerating the risk of performance going over the hill. All right, but we're ready because we've got systems in place, be it through our monitoring tools, our wearables, our feedback systems, or whatever, to just tolerate that risk. And then risk mitigation, which again is, these are just crude examples, right? We've got many of these, but I'm just trying to, highlight the point. So how do you then remove the risk? And again, come back to our ubiquitous list. Certain things, I want to remove illness. I want to remove the risk of someone getting sick and ill. Is it absolutely possible to remove illness? No, of course it's not. It's a probability conversation. Right, based on how we as human beings live and operate, and how athletes operate, what the environments they are in, how often they wash their hands, what they eat, who do they hang out with, etc., etc. There's so many different variables. You cannot stop someone getting ill. We're all going to get ill at some point. Okay, so it's a probability conversation. So again, this is an easy one, but now we come back to COVID monitoring, and everyone in the room was managing this. But using something like temperature regulation or heart, elevated heart rates, where we see particular spikes through strategic monitoring interactions. Now we can say, okay, well, we can remove that risk. We can mitigate the risk. Stop training. Right? It looks like you're getting the flu, or it might be COVID, but something's happening. You need to change your training intervention. So we're going to immediately start to look at using our metrics to manage the process. We can mitigate it. Same thing here, just similar type of data. We see certain spikes. This is average heart rate and temperature. Huge temperature spike. Okay, that's not normal. We need to do something. Let's mitigate that risk of an elevated temperature. What does it mean? This is our comprehensive concussion brain injury TBI protocol. And again, it's very small. I'm expecting you to read everything. But, again, on the left-hand side here, whether it's managing the energy deficit that comes with concussion, whether it's managing inflammation, whether it's managing neurogenesis, those are the 3 things that concussion would kind of try to affect. All right, if we know that, we understand the literature is saying that's what's happening during a concussion. What are we building out our processes in terms of supplementation, strategy, training load, to help mitigate the consequence of that concussion being a prolonged insult and minimizing the training, the training impulse. How quickly it's not a conversation of how quickly can we get them back to training, but how quickly can we rehabilitate them back to their habitual levels. Okay. So I show you that again, just because it's a conversation around systems in place, but it starts with a conversation. Do we identify what the potential challenges might be? So just to close, most people don't want to be part of the process. All right. They just want to be part of the outcome. That's how I started the conversation today. We all get consumed and talk about optimizing performance. But for me, flipping on its head sometimes and just looking at the narrative of underperformance and the risk of underperformance, does that do anything to help us along the way? Is it just more checks that we're making sure that our team, our operation, our system is really looking at the whole scope of everything that an athlete is exposed to, and what's our role in orchestrating the success and the probability of success in that process? I throw this up here just because, again, some of you might be interested in some of the materials and literature that we've kind of written here. We recently released our second high performance journal, so you can get that through that QR code or the website there. Again, a lot of the methods and processes that we have in place, you can download that as an electronic copy from that website. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to share and talk about, things philosophically, what we're trying to do at the Performance Institute. And again, I appreciate everyone coming out for the last 2 days. It's been fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you, Duncan. I'll use this one, let you hold on to that one. Do we have any questions? Yeah.
No, not, oh, so since you're looking at risk and probability and uncertainty and modeling that, is there a way you're currently or in the future would like to evaluate the success of those interventions for things that might happen or don't happen? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, ultimately, I'd love to. I don't know that I know how I'm going to do that or how we're going to do that right now. I think the whole pollination of this concept was through a high-functioning interdisciplinary team, largely getting frustrated or distracted by things that are unobtainable, right? So by building a system of pursuing clarity of the determinants that cause performance in a sport like ours is very, very challenging. So they're almost chasing a ghost. And I want our team to feel successful, to be motivated by the success that they can see. So it took away a lot of the pressure to define how your strength training program is clearly affecting the outcome of this athlete, or how this nutrition program is clearly affecting the outcome of the athlete. And we now started just talking in generalisms and probabilities. I would love to find a way how we will objectify that. I don't know how right now, but I think it's been more a philosophical mindset shift rather than, we're going to go in and we're going to look at probability equations across time to see how impactful our services are. It was more just about team optimization and driving highly proficient interdisciplinary strategies based on collaborative perspectives that are driven by performance clusters and performance priorities rather than sitting in our technical silo. So I've kind of waffled around the question a little bit, but the answer is no. I don't know how we would objectify right now. People want to help me with that. I would love that, but for me it was more just change of concept.
Thank you. Any other questions? Next one? Right there. Okay.
Hey, Duncan. Thanks for that great explanation on the architecture and the framework. How are you guys executing that, right, on a day-to-day basis? So given that you have fighters coming through, you've got training sessions lined up, you've got a couple of different things going on throughout the day, how do you integrate that battle rhythm event of that interdisciplinary team meeting to discuss all of the assessment frameworks that you have?
Yeah, great question. So let me put it this way. Our biggest challenge is geography, all right? We don't have 600 fighters in front of us every single day. Geography is our biggest challenge. Second biggest challenge is logistics, operational logistics. How do we maximize customized and bespoke interventions to meet the athlete where they need to be met times 600 and do it to the same level of impact? That's our second biggest challenge. This information that I put up here, or this kind of philosophy, is largely how I try to filter down into the team or position the team for success. Again, Aaron helps me on this, and Aaron and I largely are working horizontally. I see our roles as horizontal roles that are internal. I see the verticals as vertical roles that are external, i.e. to the athlete. So this kind of strategy and philosophy is something that we've messaged to the whole staff. The staff essentially created the clusters, so they own the clusters, right? That nutrition, strength and conditioning, sports psychology, operations. Tell me what your performance priorities are. So that was an exercise that they took time to do. And then we've interrogated it and essentially objectified it through scoring systems. Now those scoring systems allow Aaron and I to essentially be very strategic and targeted to make sure that those interactions are happening, because they've been prioritized and they were pollinated by you as a technical area, right? So that's kind of where it came from. it gives direction to Aaron and myself's work on a day-to-day basis. That's the answer to your question. Is it's allowing us to be focused and prioritize and not missing the needle and everything. If I just took risk and look at that ubiquitous list of risk, like I would just be Tasmanian devil, right? I just like everything's a risk. So what it's allowing us to do is be very strategic and targeted to drive interdisciplinary cohesion. Of course, we have team meetings and updates and sharing and dialogue, etc., and everyone on the team understands that philosophically this is what we're working to. But I think it released the pressure valve of me saying to the team, you need to tell me how your service is influencing the success in the octagon. A lot of them, like, I don't know. I know they're getting stronger. I know I know more robust, whatever it may be. I know they're more stabilized in their body composition. They're all probabilities that we hope will get to the answer of risk. So that's how we're using this type of stuff. It's more for the performance managers to work horizontally between the verticals.